brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
We will call the meeting to order. Welcome to the June 1st, 2020 meeting of the Eau Claire Plan Commission. This meeting is being broadcast live by Valley Media Works on Charter channels 993 and 994, as well as digital cable channels 96 and 97, and WRFP-LP 101.9, and online at valleymediaworks.org. The Plan Commission attempts to conduct its public hearings in a relatively informal manner within the constraint that we must deal with the issues before us in an orderly and businesslike fashion. We give the applicant an opportunity to speak first, and then others either for or against a proposal. Are each permitted to speak once. We do request that everyone restrict their comments to the issues before us, avoid unnecessary repetition, and be prudent in the use of time. We want to make sure that we have adequate time to review and discuss all items with equal diligence. And just as a reminder for those of us in the room, make sure your cell phones are off or silent. And for those joining us from home, I hope you're able to find a quiet room to be in so we're not distracted by background noise. We have a couple of Plan Commission business items to take care of before we get started. The first of them is we will be showing our appreciation for former, oh, you're absolutely right. I missed the roll call on the agenda. This is a new one for us, so it's I might miss it again next meeting too, who knows. So we will call the roll. Commissioner Prosnick. Christofferson.
Here.
Seymour.
Here.
Brenholt.
Here.
Granlund.
Yes, it took me a while to hit the button. I am here.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Greigert.
Here.
Wolfgram.
Here.
And Obaid.
Here.
With that concluded, we'll move on to item number 2, which is showing our thanks for former Commissioner Terry Peterson for his time on the Plan Commission. I don't know if it's appropriate. Should I come up there, or I can read it from here? Okay. Terry, it's been a pleasure serving with you on the Plan Commission.
Likewise. And
as a token of appreciation, the staff has prepared a certificate of appreciation, which reads, whereas Terry C. Peterson has served the citizens of the City of Eau Claire as a Plan Commissioner since 2014, and whereas he has been a strong advocate of comprehensive planning, site planning, transportation, city and riverfront beautification, and neighborhood revitalization, and whereas his keen eye to detail assisted the city and department in the completion of various professional plans and reports, and whereas his professional knowledge, experience, and sense of humor have been keystones of the Plan Commission, and whereas his thoughtful and detailed review of development proposals has encouraged higher quality development from the community. And I would add, whereas he's been kind enough to organize a group meeting every year and occasionally brings treats for the rest of the commissioners. Now therefore, the City Plan Commission of the City of Eau Claire hereby wishes to express its appreciation, as well as the appreciation of city staff and the citizens of the city, to Terry Peterson for his contributions, leadership, and service to the City of Eau Claire.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I may, I have a few brief comments. It's only one sheet. Sense of humor. First, when I was asked to apply to the Plan Commission by a good friend of mine 6 years ago, I thought being born and raised in Eau Claire, except for a stint in the Air Force and while I was going to college, I've been a resident here all my life, so I figured it's a way for me to give back to the community. My first meeting was in the spring of 2014. My first agenda was 193 pages. The meeting ran past 11 o'clock, and I'm thinking, what the hell did I get myself in for? Well, we've never run that late. We've never had that big of an agenda before. Now, six plus years later, I'd like to thank Daryl, Pat, Ned, Mr. Petrie, and Scott in planning, along with John, Leah, and Dave in engineering for their service, their expertise, and their dedication. And a very special thanks to Angie, working in the planning department, working behind the scenes. I really appreciated emails from her in my response to the RSVP. I hope she appreciated my humor. Also, thanks to my fellow commission members for their service. Welcome to the commission, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. So thank you very much for this honor. Thank you.
And item number 3 is an introduction to our new member who is sitting in Commissioner Peterson's previous location. Her name is Mary Prosnick, and Mr. Allen will give us a little bit of background.
Oh,
on
sure.
her.
Well, I will allow Mary perhaps to introduce herself a little bit more background, but yes, thank you, Mr. Larson, and welcome to Mary this evening to take part in the Plan Commission. Mary's most recently serving on the Redevelopment Authority here with the city, so has transitioned from that seamlessly, I think, to the Plan Commission here to fill in and take over where Mr. Peterson has left us. So you saw the change of the guard happening here this evening. So welcome to Mary, and look forward to working with you and really getting to know a lot of your background as well in terms of development, especially residential development, multifamily development, that housing background that we really are looking forward to utilizing here in Eau Claire and at the Plan Commission. So I'll let Mary share a few words as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for the introduction. Thank you to the Planning Commission and the Appointees Committee for selecting me to serve. I am super excited to be a part of this. I was not born and raised in Eau Claire, but it's the one place that I've always moved back to and called home. My family and I have moved back and forth all over the place, and I've been coming to Eau Claire since I was a little girl, so I feel most at home here. So I'm just so excited to be a part of all the exciting changes coming to our city. As Scott said, I work for Riverbend Rentals in town, which is owned by two well-known developers. So I've gotten a lot of experience with working towards that in my career, which I have found that it's by far my true passion. I've worked in property management for about 15 years. So this is definitely, I think, my comfort zone, and so I'm just ready to serve the great city here and work with everyone, see what we can get going. So thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Item number 4 is approval of the May 4th, 2020 minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Leah Ness, do you have your hand up? Ms. Ness? Okay. Well, without objection, the minutes are approved. Item number 5 is a public hearing for recommendation to the City Council to allow an amendment to the general development plan for off-street parking for 115 apartment units at Farwell and Emery. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission, as well as public joining us here as well. We are keeping handy our cell phones too to make sure if there are any technical issues rising here this evening. So I believe, I know Ms. Ness, we had some audio issues last meeting, so we unable to, before the meeting, test her audio, but I don't know if she's listed as a panelist, Mr. Chair, or if she's still listed as an attendee.
She is listed as an attendee.
Okay. So you would have to be the one to unmute her from that position. And we could certainly test, because I know Ms. Ness will be a part of this presentation here from staff.
I will make her a panelist. Ms. Ness, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you.
Oh,
And we can hear
okay,
you.
we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. I'm on my phone, but I have you on my computer, so I can see
Okay.
what you guys are doing. I just can't talk over my computer for some reason.
Okay, very
Okay.
good. Thank you.
We can hear you much clearer, by the way. Did you have something, a comment to make about the minutes?
I did not. I just wanted to check my audio.
Oh, okay.
Very good.
All right, very good, thank you.
Yes, thank you
All right,
for
Mr. Allen.
participating. All right, and thank you, Mr. Chair, again. As we go forward here with this agenda item 5, as it's listed here, again, first public hearing item before you here this evening. Not sure if you can see this very clearly. Item number 5, again, located downtown Eau Claire. It is located at the northwest corner of South Farwell Street and Emery Street. Proposed project is known as Wilson Square. It was previously known as this as well. Again, the request is to amend the general development plan to allow multifamily apartments with a reduced setback located here along, again, primarily along Farwell Street, Emery Street, and also Seaver Street, with access to South Barstow Street. The area in question is just over 1.6 acres in size. This was rezoned to the CBD-P early last year. So the proposed zoning is still the same, just amending essentially the overlay, but the P portion of that, the general development plan. The current land use still provides for 3 office buildings, 2 multifamily residential buildings, generally on the site. A proposed land use, again, would be 115 units of again, multifamily living in 2 different buildings. The applicant is JCAP Construction. They're requesting to amend, again, the general development plan to allow for the 2 5-story apartment buildings with reduced setback, as well as to approve off-site parking. And that's the part of the conditional use permit portion of the request. The proposed project, again, is an amendment to the Wilson Square project for senior living, memory care facility, and commercial space in a similar footprint, which was approved very early in 2019. This shows a little more specifically the parcels in question, as well as, again, you can see the conditional use request for the off-site parking, of course, is a separate parcel to the north of Seaver Street. Here shows existing conditions in the area. At the northwest corner would remain a building, commercial building owned by others. Again, the parcels currently have 3 vacant commercial single-story structures along Barstow and 2 vacant multifamily 2-story structures, one with an address off Emery and one off of Farwell. And again, these would be removed for redevelopment. The proposed land use, unlike the original approved land use, would be entirely residential with 115 apartments. The facade of the proposed 5-story structure along South Farwell is shown at 20 feet from the property line. This shows a little bit more clearly. The gray is the parking area. Green is the proposed landscape and open space areas. And then the brown coloration there are the two proposed buildings, with South Farwell Street to the right, Emery to the south, Seaver to the, Emery to the bottom of the screen, Seaver to the top of the screen, and South Barstow to the left. The minimum required setback in the CBD zoning district is 20 feet. And the facade, so the actual face of the building, is shown at that. However, there is a front deck that would extend 6 feet into the setback along Farwell. It's shown a little bit more clearly here, to the top right of the screen, which also includes open staircase to the ground floor, the open staircase down to the lower level, and in the end, adding all those pieces up leaves only 3.5 feet to the property line. The building is shown as being the 20-foot setback distance on the north side. You can show a little bit more clearly here. And the southern building along Emery Street has similar features extending into the setback like that of Farwell. Again, this is a request by the applicant to be permitted to extend into that 20-foot setback. I'm sure as they're attending, they'll be providing some additional information on that. However, in your packet, the applicant has provided a separate narrative, as well as some sample photos and site drawings of other recent projects in the downtown area that have similar reduced setbacks. A key difference, though, with the Wilson Square project is its location on that principal arterial street of South Farwell Street, which has a 30-mile-an-hour posted speed limit, 4 lanes of traffic, and high average daily trips. In addition, the proposed setback does not allow for a landscape buffer similar to the other approved projects that had a reduction in the front yard setback. As shown here, again, the staircases, the deck, all those extensions into the setback reduce and minimize the buffering and landscaping in that area. You can see the difference too on that south building, as they call it the south wing, with that 20-foot setback does provide for, again, a larger green space buffering, particularly along the principal arterial here. So with that, again, the requested amendment through this plan development, again, that P portion of the zoning, does provide for the opportunity to allow reductions in the setbacks. And it should be noted that such a request was approved with the original project. That was granted a 5.9-foot setback from the property line along South Farwell Street, 6.8 along Seaver, 13.9 along Emery, and 14.5 along Barstow. Again, what's needs to be noted there too, again, 5.9 was what was permitted at that time along Farwell. Here they're requesting 3.5. Along Emery was 13.9, and here it's 4.5. So there are some reductions there. Again, on the flip side, along Seaver Street was approximately 6.8 feet. However, here it is more closely matching that 20 feet required. And then along Barstow, they were requesting 14.5. And again, here it is showing more of the 20-foot setback. So there was a bit of a shuffling of the proposed buildings. And again, these extensions from the building facade into, directly into the sidewalk on both Emery and Farwell are the requested modification before you this evening. Some additional modifications will be related primarily to the parking and those adjustments there as well. I should also note too, with the original approval last year, there was a partial alleyway vacation, and we'll show some drawings here, hopefully can show more specifically what is remaining. I think this shows it a little bit, kind of that notch up along Seaver Street. That is a remaining portion there between the other property owner's building and the applicant's property. That is the remaining, hard to see there too, but a little notch there is the remaining alleyway. The rest, as it extended down to Emery, has been vacated, and that was part of that original approval. But again, there is that one portion that is remaining and is currently necessary for access for, at least for the neighboring property owner. So with that, again, the site plan approval is also before you this evening. Again, the general development plan and then modifications to that, and then also the new site plan as shown here that goes with that. So with the site plan, again, shows 115 apartments in 2 buildings. This is a little bit more specific civil drawings, a little busy, and also rotated. So Farwell now is to the top, Emery is to the right, Barstow to the bottom, and Seaver to the left. You can see though too, a little more hatched notation, kind of the bottom left corner of the drawing is that building to remain owned by others. But again, this shows a little bit more specifically some of the intricacies of the site plan. Again, 115 apartment units in 2 buildings, what they're calling Wilson Square North Wing and Wilson Square South Wing. Combined, the 2 buildings are proposed to include 24 studio apartments, 59 one-bedroom units, and 32 two-bedroom units. The applicant indicates they intend to market the project as what they call mixed income with their calculation of 72%, which my math shows is about 83 units, as being workforce housing rent levels. It's important to note this has not been defined with any further detail with regards to income levels or restrictive covenants. As the work of the Chippewa Valley Regional Housing Task Force indicated, I know Commissioner Wolfgram has also identified and will likely share here as well, again, through her work with that task force. There is workforce housing, essentially definition provided through that task force, and that will be part of the discussion, I'm sure, moving forward here this evening. But as submitted by the applicant, no specifics were provided in terms of what those income levels would be or any other restrictive covenants. The density of the project, it's important to note, does remain similar to the previously approved project at a little bit over 70 units per acre. Leah Ness, Deputy City Engineer, will be presenting a little bit more on the parking situation with the proposal, but we'll just mention in terms of that off-site parking that currently the parking requirement for the project is 147 stalls with the combined reductions for the transit line and bicycle parking brings it down to 125. Site plan shows 94, so they're at 31 spaces short. Proposed parking here, it's hard to read. 45 would be at grade, and then 49 would be underground. That along with 14 parking for 14 bicycles, which would be 7 racks, or as they have labeled here, stanchions, kind of to the bottom right of the parking area there shown. A little bit of a notch, kind of an angle there. And again, Ms. Ness will share a little bit more specifically. Hard to see in some of these drawings, but the proposed underground parking would extend into the existing alley right-of-way. So as you see here, this drawing essentially presupposes the alleyway area being vacated, otherwise occupied primarily by the parking. However, it's important to note that essentially not quite half, but about 7 feet from the west, or from the left, I should say, an additional 7 feet from the left, so right of the green strip running north-south, the top there, is still right-of-way. So there's the green strip of about 7 feet, add an additional 7 feet, total of 14-foot wide alleyway. Again, the applicant did not show that very clearly on here, but there are some other drawings that do show it, and we'll highlight those here shortly by Ms. Ness. Some of the other details include trash enclosure. You can see a little bit notched out to the bottom left of the screen within a 12-foot landscaping strip, as they call it. So you can see it there kind of to the top left. They call it recycling center. That's the trash enclosures. A landscape plan does show street trees within the boulevards along Emery Street, Barstow and Seaver. You can see those shown there. And the plan also shows a patio area and fenced dog park area between the two buildings. Each are approximately 20 by 20 in size. So that's kind of more of the active open space in that area. Should also note that, get to the elevations here. You can see here a little more clearly proposed patios on the rooftop patios. So that also is some of the active open space, but again, on top of the buildings here in this case. Again, as noted, do want to highlight again, I think it shows it best here, again, that to the top middle of the screen, running top to bottom, there's a 7-foot wide landscaping strip that again is shown here within that western half, the remaining 14-foot wide public alleyway. So that instead should remain as public right-of-way accessible to vehicular traffic and not just planted with a strip. Again, should there be alleyway vacation, that may be an opportunity, but that too, again, would be dependent on the neighboring business owner, not this current project. So again, that's in the current public alleyway. And in so doing, as that expands then, it would create a driveway off of Seaver Street at 32 feet wide rather than 30-foot maximum. So something to keep in mind. It was presented here at a smaller size, can be up to 30 feet, but again, if you take that entire grass strip in the middle, running top to bottom, that would be all pavement. And so that would lead to a 32-foot wide driveway. Finally, with that, certified survey map is also required. As you can see here, there are multiple parcels, so those would all need to be merged into one lot. That can be done administratively, does not require Plan Commission review or approval. Finally, before we get into engineering items, the building elevations. Again, I included these slides if we want to go back for any kind of conversations. Rating plan, utility plan, parking plan. I know Ms. Ness has some additional slides as well, so we can jump back to those if there are specific questions. But to talk more about the architecture of the proposed buildings, they're presented as that of what they call New York brownstone architecture. The exterior materials are shown as brownstone and matching composite siding with ornate cornices and window and door trim. The long facade of each building is given some articulation via the use of upper story balconies, you can see here. Ground floor awnings, there you can see as well, primarily along the front street side facades. And color and material variation, as you can see here as well, and the decorative window trim and cornices. However, again, do need to acknowledge that it is more of a flat facade than what was originally proposed or approved with the previous project. This does show a mix of materials, again, the balconies, and some additional features to try to compensate for more of the flat facade. Again, front decks and steps are just concrete, but you can see here more of a colored concrete. Each building will have, as noted again, that about a 26 by 28 rooftop deck or patio. And the upper story 2-bedroom units are what you're seeing there with the balconies, and those are accessed with sliding glass doors. So those are some architectural features I wanted to highlight. Again, there's the conditional use as noted as well. The information about that is in the staff report. It does require Plan Commission approval for that off-site parking. Applicant is requesting to enter into a contract for 27 of 37 spaces at the Seaver Street lot, again, immediately to the north of the project. This will still leave the project short 4 parking spaces. So again, as with the request for the reduced setbacks, as well as the added driveway width, Plan Commission can also approve this parking reduction through the plan development. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Ness, and I will get to her slides here now. I don't know if, Mr. Chair, if you'd like to ask any questions of planning staff, or you want to move on to Ms. Ness. I would prefer to turn over to Ms. Ness right now, and then we can ask questions of staff as a whole. If that's okay?
All right, we'll move on to Ms. Ness. And Ms. Ness, you are no longer muted.
Okay, that sounds great. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm going to start off with just an overview of the utilities. You had seen this plan sheet a little bit earlier, but there are city services on all sides of the proposed Wilson Square project. The city services would have water and sanitary connections onto Farwell Street, stormwater connections on Seaver Street, and also Barstow Street, along with sanitary connections. And then off of Emery, there would be a stormwater and water connections. So these would require having work within the right-of-way permits and also the standard plumbing permits that go through the planning department and inspections, building inspections. On the next slide, we look at the grading and drainage, and all of the roof drains would be directed to the city storm sewer system. As we had mentioned earlier on the previous slide, our stormwater system is on Seaver, Barstow, and Emery Street. All the rooftops would go straight to the stormwater system, which is typical. The site is tributary to the Chippewa River at the Emery Street outfall, so it's not very far before it gets to the Chippewa River, and there is adequate capacity for the stormwater drainage there. So the stormwater detention facilities would not be required for the peak rate runoff control. Because of the amount of impervious area on the site prior to the proposed improvements, the location of the outfall, as I had mentioned, and then also the capacity that's available there. The parking surfaces will all drain to the center to trench drains, and those drains will go through a mechanical filtration structure that will then filter out the total suspended solids, and if there's any oil leakage from vehicles, that would all be taken out of the surface water before it enters into the stormwater system. So the entire site, pretty much that is impervious, drains to those trench drains, which then goes through a mechanical filtration structure. And as part of the previous submittal, the site had some additional drainage best management practices that they were implementing next to the property that is at 705 South Barstow, the adjacent property to Wilson Square. And with this new mechanical filtration structure and the grading that they have going on here, we anticipate that they don't need those additional BMPs or best management practices to keep the water out of the existing property location. I'm just making sure that I hit all the points I wanted to on that slide. And then the next slide is the existing alley right-of-way. Mr. Allen had discussed this a little in his previous slides. In this slide, you can see the alleyway is highlighted in blue. With the previous Wilson Square proposal, the partial alley vacation was completed for the portion of the alley that was south of this, as Mr. Allen had mentioned. mentioned, the remaining portion of alley right-of-way is outlined in that blue color. The existing 705 South Barstow Street is owned by a different property owner, and you can see highlighted in the yellow, they have gas that services through that alleyway, and there's also existing electrical that runs down the alley. We did reach out to Excel and also to the applicant, and they are working, their contractor is working directly with Excel for changes to those services. And they can expand more on that if needed. The plan proposes for a 32-foot wide driveway access off of Seaver Street, which is 7 feet of the driveway located within the 14-foot existing alleyway right-of-way. The remaining 7 feet of the right-of-way is proposed to be landscaped, as Mr. Allen had mentioned. And the underground parking design is also right at that 7-foot, the middle portion of the existing right-of-way. So I'm anticipating that the footings would potentially be further to the west, and they're not shown on the civil plans that are submitted here. So with these encroachments into the existing alleyway, the city would recommend a vacation of the right-of-way if the parking structure is to remain within the right-of-way, or a redesign of the parking structure to be within the existing property limits. A vacation could be completed prior to construction, which would result in the need of a construction easement from the 705 South Barstow Street property, or the vacation could be delayed until occupancy, which would require a work within the right-of-way permit from the city to complete the construction work. If a vacation and the current design move forward, there's the potential for an additional easement with the 705 South Barstow Street property for the parking structure footings, which would be vacated into their 7 feet of the existing right-of-way, if that is vacated. Moving on to the parking, Mr. Allen had gone over these numbers, but I can expand a little more on the existing 27 spaces within the city parking lot. The Seaver Street lot is the closest public parking lot that has an average occupancy of 10 vehicles at its peak hour. The lot has 37 stalls, of which 27 are available for permit to the property owner. The permitted stalls would not be signed or designated for tenant use only. They would remain as a first-come, first-served to allow patrons of local businesses access to the lot as well. The Seaver Street lot has 24 metered stalls and 11 permit stalls, and the permit can park in the metered stalls. Typically, contracts like this are written at the fee schedule rate, so it's based off of the existing rate that is approved by City Council at the beginning of each year. We do have some background traffic counts at the parking lot. It was identified 10 years ago as a lot that had very little use. Recently, the usage has gone up some with the opening of businesses in this area. And with that, I've covered the 4 items that I wanted to touch on, and I will be available for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have a few other items just to highlight or
Okay,
I guess refer to, if I may, before questions.
you may, go ahead.
So in addition to that, I know there are some questions that had arisen late last week. I wanted to highlight, Ms. Ness mentioned one of those, which was related to the off-site parking and how that kind of contract and that situation would work. I was also questioned about bicycle parking, so that was vehicle parking. For bicycle parking, I should note that the original approval from last year referenced more of a presumption of bicycle parking within the underground garage area, but only provided specifics for above-grade bicycle parking of 4 spaces. Again, this proposal before you shows 14 spaces near the common area between the 2 buildings, but does not specifically address the underground option. So just want to kind of highlight the 2 differences between the original approval and what's before you here this evening. Should also note as well that, again, going back to this kind of overview drawing here, again, with those setbacks, both in Emery and Farwell, with the reduced setback, should be noted, the multifamily design manual does talk about snow removal storage. So in terms of snow storage and other buffering through landscaping, that's another item to keep in mind as you consider this proposed or request for a reduced setback. So just made a note of that, but that was not identified specifically in the staff report. So want to bring that up as well. I'm sure there'll be other questions that commission members may have, and I'm sure the applicant would like to address some of those as well.
All right, thank you. Questions from the commission for staff? Commissioner Greger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question could be for Mr. Allen or could be for Ms. Ness, but I see that on the screen right now, and we're talking about that setback question from the right-of-way. Farwell Street doesn't really have any sort of public boulevard between the sidewalk and the street, but if we look to the south, Emery Street has that. When the Plan Commission considers the safety aspect of this in terms of that setback, obviously it's mentioned that there's 30 miles per hour on Farwell, but there's also not a boulevard. So in some ways that's really up to the city to provide, some of that buffer space, if that really is a concern. So I guess I'm not sure if there's any comment from staff regarding the future of Farwell. I know there's been a lot of discussion about it as kind of a barrier and, a street that maybe we'd like to do some things differently to reduce, the automobile orientation of it and make it a bit more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. So I'm not sure if you'd want to speak to the difference between what we're seeing on Emery Street versus Farwell in terms of that public right-of-way and how we're choosing to design it.
Very good question. I may defer to Ms. Ness as well in terms of, especially regarding future plans for Farwell as it relates to Emery and the boulevard there as well. I believe the sidewalk width is, I want to say 8 feet, 7 to 8 feet, but again, hopefully Ms. Ness has some information.
Yes, I can add to that. South Farwell Street, the existing condition of it right now does not put it within the near CIP future. We do have counts on it, and we are continuing to study it to see what types of changes could be made on South Farwell Street, but we do not have the design at all finalized or all the data collected needed to do that. In relationship from Farwell to Emery Street, Farwell is a principal arterial where Emery Street is a local street, and so that is a difference in speed with the 30 mile per hour speeds on Farwell Street compared to 25 mile per hour on Emery Street. As for setback distances, Both streets do have the 6-inch curb. As Commissioner Greger mentioned, there is the Boulevard on Emory, but just the wider sidewalk on Farwell. So pedestrian traffic is right next to the travel lane on Farwell Street at this time.
I think the drawing
Thank you.
here, I don't know if Ms. Ness would agree that this drawing is fairly accurate regarding the boulevard, this and the lack thereof on Farwell. This is at the southeast corner of the project. So Farwell is to the right and Emory is to the left. Not sure how that comes across.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Commissioner Prosnick, did you have a question?
I did, excuse me, just in regards to the parking, because this isn't going to be senior housing anymore, it's going to be market rate with some workforce in there. Just factoring in guest parking, I guess, because I know like even with some of our developments, we always meet the parking requirements and then the friends come, which generally creates a huge issue depending upon where you're located. So my concern would be I'm assuming you guys have taken that into consideration, but where that overflow is going to go. Is it going to congest the area too bad in an area that doesn't have adequate maybe street parking as it is? And then you think of plows coming through. If you have, not only are you short 4 spaces, but it's not just 4 spaces then, it's also their guest, which I could just imagine it would make it really congested down there. So I would just be kind of curious to see what your thoughts were on that or what staff's thoughts were on that.
Sure. I'm not sure if Ms. Ness has something to add. I may just mention that I believe there is on-street parking on Seaver, Emory, and Barstow, not on South Farwell, of course, but I believe on the other 3 streets. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And then lots that are near here that are open for parking is the Schlagelmilch lot, which is a free lot. And that is within the, just at the fringe of the 800-foot walk distance. And that's free 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the exception of the potential transfer center site going there while the transfer station is being built. Otherwise, there's a lot at the transfer center as well, and Main Street, and there is a parking deck just off of Gray and Graham Avenue. So there are some other parking, city parking lots available nearby. There may be some private property lots if people are looking for other locations to purchase their parking from. But there is some free on-street parking as well to the east of Farwell Street, not time restricted as it could be west of Farwell.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? Commissioner Greger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This would be for Ms. Ness and just kind of building off the parking discussion. So obviously, there's a lot in our packet about the proposed parking and the fact that there's 4 additional spaces unaccounted for. So I guess my question is what action does the Plan Commission need to take in order to waive those 4 spaces? Is it just simply approve the project as proposed, or is there some additional action that's needed?
There is
I'm going to defer to Mr. Allen on that. I believe it would be part of the conditional use and the approval of the projects, but I'll let him speak to that.
That's correct. And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, you were going to add something as well.
I was just going to mention that as part of the agenda item is a conditional use permit for off-street parking.
Right. Yeah, we could include that as part of that conditional use. I was looking here at the staff, kind of the site plan approval letter, That's draft. It does talk about number of parking stalls means city requirements. That would just, we would just modify that per the guidance of the Plan Commission here. If they want to approve it as submitted, then we would modify that to be, accommodate that.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions from the commission? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. I hoping the applicant is
yep.
available, or?
And I don't know which person on the list here is the applicant.
There may be several. I know from JCAP, we've met with Mr. Alex Padernos as well as Mr. Brian Johnson. I know from AEC, the engineer, Mr. Matt Apple. I don't know if others are on the line as well.
We will we'll start with Mr. Apple. Are you prepared to speak for the applicant? Oops, there.
Yeah, I can. I believe Alex Padranos is on also. Can anyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you,
Yes,
Matt.
we can hear you.
Okay, great. As far as I know, Alex is on also. Alex?
We'll go to him
are you
next.
there?
Oh, did we want Alex as well?
Okay.
Would you like to have both at once, Mr. Chair, or one at a time?
Mr. Padros,
Yeah.
can you hear me now?
It would be preferred to have one at a time, I think just for the sake of the minutes and for the sake that we cannot see you. So,
Okay.
Our, Mr. Secretary is also in agreement with that, so I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, to put you on the spot, but I guess we'll let the applicant choose who would like to speak first.
Mr. Padros, are you prepared to speak for the applicant?
This is Alex.
Try again. Mr. Padros?
Alex trying to talk?
Is it Alex?
This is Alex Padros.
Yep.
You're very quiet, Alex. We can't quite hear you.
How's that?
Not much better.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
that's better. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so I'm actually sitting here with Robert Johnson. He's the architect on the project, as well as Brian Johnson. No relation, but he's the owner of JCAP. I think I'll let, I think it'd be a more efficient use of everybody's time if I just open it up to any questions of us. We're obviously excited to get this project back going again. And Matt Apple is the engineer on the project, so he could answer any more technical questions as far as drainage or civil plans. So I
Okay.
guess we'll just open it up for questions.
I will open it up to questions. If there's one that comes up that you would rather have Mr. Apple answer, just let me know and I'll switch to him.
Perfect.
Any questions from the commission for Mr. Padros? Mr. Brenholt?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the applicant, can you speak towards your plans for snow removal during the winter, given the somewhat minimal number of parking places?
We typically, with all our projects that have site issues, or I would say restrictions in space, what we do is just contract with Haas, and they haul all of our snow to an off-site location. It's worked well in the past. We've got over, 300-400 units in Eau Claire, and it's never really been an issue. It's expensive, but it's something we've dealt with in the past.
Okay, so you would be taking the snow, putting it into a truck, number of trucks, and hauling it away rather than pushing it to the edge of the lot?
That's correct. We would pile up enough, depending on what type of winter we have, we pile up enough on site as possible until it impedes with any sort of traffic flow or pedestrian flow, and then we take everything else off site.
Okay, given the diagram for the parking, it appears to me it'd be difficult to pile it up anywhere without reducing some number of parking places. Maybe I'm seeing it wrong.
There are grass areas that lend themselves for piles, but yeah, you're correct. In a site like this, most of the snow would be taken off-site. Ample
Okay,
space,
thank you.
Different properties in Eau Claire that we're already bringing snow to currently.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Wolfgram.
Thank you, Chairperson Larson, and good evening, Mr. Padernos and the group that you're with. I support this amendment. It's very encouraging to continue to see historically market rate developers be mindful of community need for affordable and workforce housing, demonstrating that you are a stakeholder in our community. This need is only going to increase as a result of COVID-19 as many of our neighbors begin to recover economically. It's a very significant contribution that Mr. Padernos has designated 72% or 83 of his 115 units to workforce housing income levels. Although HUD does not distinguish between affordable housing and workforce housing, housing authorities, most notably the Urban Land Institute, and as Scott Allen referred to previously, the definition that the Chippewa Valley Affordable Housing Task Force uses, defines workforce housing as housing that is affordable to households earning 60 to 120% of the county median income. In Eau Claire, the county median income hovers close to $52,000. Therefore, workforce housing incomes would range from approximately $31,000 to $60,000 per year. In your narrative, you state that 72% of Wilson Square will have workforce housing rent levels, but you do not designate the use of the nationally accepted definition. So my question is, can you adopt this definition that is used nationally, is used by our Chippewa Valley Affordable Housing Task Force, as well as the definition that we have approved other workforce housing developments with?
Yes.
Well, if you responded, I could not hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so
We've lost you again, Mr. Padernos. You've come in. That's better.
okay, so I actually spoke with Aaron White at the place like shot.
Oh, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Hey, you think maybe if you guys hang on a second, I'll call in from my phone. This is just a little.
Okay. Yeah.
Give me 1 minute, please.
Okay. Can you hear me, Mr. Padernos?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Well, go ahead and try to answer the question. Nope.
Can you hear me? Hello? How's that?
Okay. Can you try it again now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead and answer.
So we actually worked with Aaron Whiteside to figure out what exactly we consider workforce housing. So we actually based our rent levels on the lower end of that spectrum, 60% of county median income. So our rent levels for those 83 units do fall into that 60% of county median income, from 649 to, I believe, 1100.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then I'll just end with that I most certainly agree with you that Wilson Square provides a high-quality workforce housing option in downtown Eau Claire that many, including young professionals, need and that business owners want for their employees. I've talked with many residents as well as business owners over the year, but residents who work in downtown Eau Claire but cannot afford to live here. Very often, those that work downtown want to also live downtown and have access to its quality of life amenities. And yes, Wilson Square would, as you quote, increase the diversity, vitality, and strength of downtown Eau Claire, end of quote. As a side note, I just want to let you know I've spent a lot of time in New York City. I'm very much a fan of the New York brownstone architecture style, and I'm very excited to see the blending of this style, as you say, to complement the early 20th century architecture of downtown Eau Claire. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Christopherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if the developer has been in communication with the other occupant of that block. Has there been any open communication about the location of the dumpster or the vacation of that alleyway?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of confusion about the need to actually vacate that alley because we actually did for the prior project. We have been in constant communication with the adjacent property owner, who's the only other property owner on the entire block, Mr. Steve Harmon. He actually is listening in tonight. We've been in constant contact with him through the development of this project. He's in full support. I don't know if he is speaking tonight. I know he said he's gonna be listening. So, Steve Harmon, if you are there, feel free to speak up. I don't know if you are. I'm on my phone now, so I can't see any of the attendees anymore.
Yeah, we'll call on him in a little bit. Any other questions?
But my question also then entails Ms. Ness' testimony about the footings, and I'm just wondering whether or not that is going to be a decision made. Do you have some sense of how you are going to move in that particular area? And it might help to inform us of our decision this evening.
Mr. Padnrose?
I'm sorry, I had a tough time understanding the question. Is there any way you could speak? And it's probably on my end. Could you repeat yourself?
Yes. When Ms. Ness was making her testimony about the vacation of that alleyway and the fact that the footings under this plan encroach on that, I'm just wondering if you have some insight as to how you might solve that. It might inform our decision for this evening.
I think I'll refer to the architect on that question. So Bob, I think, and we're having a tough time hearing you, but I think you're asking about the encroachment of the footings into the alleyway. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Bob, do you want to speak to that? I don't think the footings are...
I think we encroach half of the alley. I think we're 7 or 8 feet away with the underground. I think our plan is to go through with the vacation of that alley, though.
Yeah, that's correct. And we were under the understanding that we could attain vacation of the alleyway after approvals, which we fully plan on doing. And Steve Harmon, the adjacent property owner, is on board with. We fully plan on honoring the same agreement that we had the first time around, which was they granted us entitlements under the condition that they would not issue a building permit until we dug the foundation and then fully waterproofed his foundation, to alleviate any of his concern about his building becoming unstructurally sound.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other?
And I apologize if I'm not answering your question as you wish. We're really struggling to hear clearly here, so we're just kind of piecing things together and trying to answer as well as possible.
Okay. Apologize for the technical difficulties. Commissioner Gregor, did you have a question?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question for Mr. Paternos is regarding the bicycle parking. Obviously, there's the 14 spaces at surface level, but is there anything planned inside the building or inside the parking structure below that would allow people to more securely or under shelter park bicycles?
Yeah, absolutely. Every parking stall has space for 2 to 4 bicycles in front of the car hanging, and those hanging areas would have adequate hookups for a lock, so that would actually be secure bike storage.
Great. I guess as a follow-up to that, would you see it acceptable if some people brought bicycles into their apartments? Do you think that would be a relatively easy thing for someone to do based on the design of the building?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. If we start, I mean, that's just a property management issue. If we start seeing dirty tracks, we're going to figure out who's doing it and tell them to stop. But as long as people are responsible, we have no problem with them bringing bicycles into their unit. It's their space. They're paying for it, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Wolfgram, did you have another question?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Any other questions from the commission for the applicant? Commissioner Gregor?
Yeah, thank you. Just another question about, I guess this is just kind of getting some perspective on the decision to move forward on this redesign. Do you think you could maybe go into a bit more detail about the decision to go with an apartment-style building versus a senior apartment building that was proposed over a year ago, and then was also included a commercial space and some memory care space?
Yeah, we've really just noticed. So we for full transparency, we were busy with a lot of other projects. So we got approvals on this one, and then we kind of waited to start construction, and then we just saw a need for more workforce housing. You know, we've been to lots of these meetings, and we keep hearing over and over affordability, workforce. So we thought, you know, what does downtown really need? And at the time, we didn't think a senior deal was, or, you know, senior housing facility was at the top of that list as far as Eau Claire's needs. So we decided to just go back to the drawing board, and we're pretty happy with our outcome so far. We think this is a much better fit for the area.
Great, thanks very much.
Okay, any other questions from the commission? Commissioner Gregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one additional question, kind of building off the reality on the developers' side about, you know, being busy with a lot of other projects. Obviously, there's a number of other projects downtown that have been discussed in the last 5 years or so. including on the Eau Claire River over at the Hipsch site, and then the former Wells Fargo building. I guess if the developers could give some perspective on, you know, how they feel this project will be able to occur, I guess, given being busy with a lot of other projects and maybe not being able to complete some of the
I'd
previous
love to address that. I'd love to address that. If you've ever taken a drive down Chippewa Street, Niagara Street, Hudson, and Broadway, it's a lot of crap, and we've been focusing on turning that crap into beautiful brand new housing. So as far as workload, that's kind of been our focus so far. We know that we have projects in the pipeline, like the one we're proposing tonight, but we saw the need to focus on, I would say beautifying that neighborhood behind Water Street there, where all the, in the Randall Park neighborhood, that kind of took precedence because that was more, I guess, more urgent. We had there's homes falling apart all over that neighborhood, so.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions from the commission? Commissioner Wolfgram.
Yes, just to firm up again that definition of workforce housing, it sounds as though when you're talking then about rents from $690 to $1,100, as you said, you spoke with Aaron about focusing on the lower end of that range, so that would be between 60 and 80% of the county median income. So I just wanted to confirm that with you, because I do think that we need a more specific definition as we move forward.
Yeah, that is correct. So we kind of backed into that bracket. We realized there's a range. Like you said, 60 to 120% of county median income towards housing expenses when you talk about renting, not buying. We, put the numbers into our model, and we figure out how low we could go, which is in as far as affordability and workforce housing. The lower you go, the better it is. The more people are going to be able to afford it. So that 60 to 80% is the lowest we could lower the rents on those 83 units of affordable housing before the project became infeasible.
No, the 60 to 80 is great. I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page about that range of percentages, and it sounds like we are, so thank you.
Yeah, it's actually on the lower end, more towards 60 than 80.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? All right. This is a public hearing, so we will call on members of the public. I know Mr. Harmon is in attendance. We will start with him. Good evening, Mr. Harmon.
Good evening. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for letting me address the Planning Commission. We are the property owner at 705 South Barstow and have been so for approximately 30 years. We'd like to start out by thanking Scott Allen and the other people in their decisions to keep 10 stalls metered, so that our people that rent from us will be able to have stalls available. At this point right now, they do park on South Barstow on the street itself, and some on Emery and some on Seaver as well. But if some of those stalls start going away because of the apartment, it's good to know that they will have the availability of 10 metered stalls. Secondly, then, we have been working with JCAP, not just on this project, but on the first project. And it was on the first project, I think our concerns were addressed. It took us a little while to get our understanding of what was going to be constructed completed and passed on to the Planning Commission, and they allowed us, as well as the City Council, additional time to understand it. But on this particular change, I don't feel we would need that extra time. We were assured by JCAP and Alex that, and he just stated it previously, that they would honor the obligations that were worked out before in waterproofing the side of our building that adjoins 707 South Barstow. That was one of our major concerns, is that 707 and 705 have been married forever together, and once 705 goes away, that side of our building, which has a basement under the majority of it, would then be exposed to weather that it's never experienced in its life. And to show that it would have a problem, and not just a possible problem, not this winter, but I believe the winter before, accidentally the water did not get turned off to 707, and the water line broke, and once it broke, that water penetrated into our basement immediately. And JCAP was very good on providing us assistance in drying that out and correcting the problem immediately. But it just shows that, it wasn't meant to be watertight when they did it and they married those buildings together. Also, that side of our building is built with what they call clay blocks, which is not brick, and so its penetration ability to water sometimes can be questionable and be more absorbent. So we're excited to hear that JCAP would continue to honor that agreement in waterproofing that side of the building. And in the change of, two more subjects, I guess, in the change of the design of the parking lot and the underground parking, it actually makes us more comfortable because previously it was being sloped almost 3 feet from the apartment buildings back towards our building. And with the winter conditions being the way they are, we were concerned that drains would freeze up and all that water would be pushing right into our building. But now with the redesign, we feel comfortable that that would not happen. And on the alley part, we do have, it is 7 feet of that alley if we agree to the abandonment, which at this point I don't see why we would not. 7 feet of that would remain our property. And that's the green space that you see on the back side of that corner building. During their construction period of the underground parking, as long as they prevent our structure from not being the foundation from not being undermined or damage to our building with no support, we would be in favor of the abandonment of the alley as the way it was originally designed. And I'm sure they would not have an objection to Excel having their trucks come in to service the gas meters that are located on that back corner of the building away from Seaver and Barstow. So we are in favor of the project, and we appreciate the fact that JCAP will be working with us to keep our building sound and safe for our tenants.
Good, thank you. Any questions from the commission for Mr. Harmon? Thank you, Mr. Harmon.
Thank you.
Oops. All right. Again, this is a public hearing. I suspect Ms. Mosley, yep, there's her hand. Ms. Mosley,
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Thank you. Last year, when the original proposal came up, I spoke against it. I was not in favor of that proposal at all, and largely because it had no allowances whatsoever for affordability. And so I see this plan as a vast improvement over the original one, and I'm really glad to hear that JCAP is doing this to respond to needs of the community. You know, we've been talking for a couple of years now about how important it is to develop more affordable housing and more workforce housing in the city of Eau Claire. And this is going to be a very good addition to that need. We know that in the last 4 months, the economic impact of the COVID crisis has really made its way known to many of our neighbors and citizens. And I don't see that that's going to clear up overnight. So anything that we can do to help developers create more workforce housing, I think is something that we should be doing. And that includes being flexible on parking requirements. I'd be worried if we were talking about a 25-space deficit, but we're talking about 4 spaces. And I believe that that is a tolerable deviation. It's a good payoff in order to get those units of workforce housing. So I encourage you all to support the rezoning, the conditional use permit, and the site plan for this developer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public here to speak on this item? Okay, I'm going to, got a call-in user that I'm not sure about. If you're calling by telephone, did you have something to say?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other members of the public here to speak on this item? I see none. So with that, I'll see if there's a motion from the commission. Commissioner Seymour.
Thank you. Before I make the motion, could I ask city staff a question?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Is the applicant correct in saying the vacation of the alley could occur after approval? And then I have one other question, if you want to take that one first.
Good question. I'm hoping Ms. Ness is still on the line. She could help with that.
Yes,
response.
I will unmute her.
Thank you.
Ms. Ness?
Yes. Referring to the vacation of the alley, we could do a deferred vacation, so it would be vacated upon occupancy of the building, and that would require the city to provide a work within the right-of-way permit because the alley would still be right-of-way during the construction. Or we could go through the vacation process prior to construction, and Mr. Harmon would need to provide a construction easement to JCAP for them to complete the construction work on his then property.
To clarify then too, Ms. Ness, that's because half of the alleyway, so 7 feet, would be deeded over to Mr. Harmon and then half to JCAP. So in order to do the construction, they would have to get a construction easement from Mr. Harmon.
Okay.
Thank you. And then as far as the conditions, the number, condition number 1 is the number of parking stalls must meet city requirements. If we are flexible in that as a plan commission, I assume that the city would follow suit.
Certainly, this is at the Plan Commission's discretion within the General Development Plan modification.
So if I move for approval of this and say with staff recommendations, that will somehow get cleaned up? Or do we need an amendment to that, or?
I would prefer approval with staff recommendations and as requested by the applicant. If you want to be, clarify, in particular, the parking requirement. And again, thinking a little bit on the fly here. So, approval with, as presented, because the applicant is requesting the parking reduction through the conditional use permit, as well as with the offsite parking and so on and so forth. So
Okay.
we could certainly, we would then modify that condition to meet what they are requesting. So if you want to deviate from what they're requesting, then I would ask for some additional specificity.
Okay.
So you could say with, yeah, as, well, yeah, so if you're saying, I suppose the question then is it just referring to condition 1, or would it be the other conditions as well? Do you have questions or concerns with any of those? Is it just the parking number?
No, that appears to be the only one that
Okay.
might be a conflict, other than number 5, which is the vacation question, but I think we've got that figured out.
Then, I guess, then to back that up, I would say, yeah, with staff conditions, modifying condition 1 to be as requested by the applicant.
Okay.
Or as presented, excuse me, as presented by the applicant.
Okay. Are we ready?
I'm ready if you are.
So I move for approval of the project as presented.
Well, to clarify, with staff conditions, modifying condition 1 to be as presented by the applicant, is that right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I didn't mean to put words in your mouth, but I guess I just did.
It was helpful. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Prosnick. Any discussion on this item? Commissioner Wolfgram.
Thank you, Chairperson Larson. Mr. Allen, how would I add to the motion that the applicant does adopt the Chippewa Valley Affordable Housing Task Force workforce housing definition of 60 to 120% of county median income, but they are targeting the 60 to 80% income range in determining rents?
That is a fine recommendation as an aspirational one. I guess aspirational recommendation, but as it currently stands, it's not a requirement that can be identified as a specific condition.
Can it be added to the minutes as an aspirational recommendation?
Yes.
Without using aspirational?
Understood. And again, those are my words. So again, I apologize for putting words in everybody's mouths tonight, but
I appreciate that.
Certainly, yeah. There's certainly we would include that in the minutes as certainly part of that discussion and the acknowledgement and comments, I should say, from the applicant.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Gregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I really think this is a great project. My city council district is just a couple blocks to the south of here, so I go right by this area quite a bit on my way to downtown, and I think this will really contribute to the downtown, adding needed density to this part of the downtown as well. I think, you know, there are some other buildings that are of similar density nearby, but there's not that many options for people that just want one bedroom, and I think this will really, you know, serve a lot of needs, and having one bedroom options is really a great way to ensure affordability. And, you know, I certainly, you know, I think the architecture of the building looks great. I think it'll be a nice addition to the neighborhood for that reason too. I was able to take a walk with a couple of neighbors from the 3rd Ward who serve on the 3rd Ward Neighborhood Association Steering Committee. We met for a social distanced walk last Wednesday and talked through a lot of the different issues once the packet had come out. And the neighborhood is very, very adept at scrutinizing projects, and they did not have any specific objections to it. They felt it was ultimately something that would be good for the downtown. Certainly wouldn't want to put words in their mouth, but we don't have any of them, I believe, on this call. But did hear from the YMCA, and they're very supportive of it, and did talk to a number of the other neighbors. There is the issue of parking, and I think that this project does as much as is really possible on a small piece of land that still wants to have density, to try to meet the standard that the city has set. That actually, I think about 3 years ago, the parking requirement was increased for apartment buildings, which I think is a little bit too extreme, and so I think this kind of is a nice compromise. And it utilizes an underutilized city lot. And if there are visitors to this building, in the preliminary findings of the parking study for downtown, it's shown that the blocks in the area are less than 50% utilized for on-street parking. And I think some of the specifics of the project too. I think if you look at the pedestrian circulation here, it's really well thought out, and there's a lot of different ways that people can access not only their units but can walk throughout the property and not have to cross driveways too much and things like that. So just really appreciate all the thought that went into this project. And the location of it is really good for walkability, bikeability, and transit. It's one of the few places in the city that has 30-minute transit service between 6:15 in the morning and 10:15 at night. So basically the entire duration of our transit service. So I'm just happy to support this tonight. So thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Christopherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Greigert, for reciting and representing a particular part of our community that uses public transit and bicycles. I'd like to just speak in making comments in general support of this development. On the Farwell side, I think that as a community, we're going to want to really think about how we want to support this development when Farwell Street is designed years down the road. In other communities, other more densely populated urban communities, that brownstone would be coming down to a sidewalk that's shaded, and this is going to have pretty intense sunlight all along that western side. So I noticed that there are awnings and that type of thing, but it just changes the quality of the interior when you have such a harsh roadway there. I do like the use of green space. The fact that they're right next to Wilson Park gives an amenity to this development that other people downtown don't have. And when they first came through with their development, thinking about senior housing, that first floor was predominantly support to the housing. It wasn't necessarily all residential, and there was that commercial. So that whole sense of how would that development use parking is very different in this particular development than it was in the original one. And I would support the idea that our community can figure out how to use less dedicated parking area. I think to use parking lots that are nearby and to assume that business parking during the day can be used by residential parking at night is a direction that the city really wants to go. So I think I think this is an improved development. The first one was also targeting a very different niche of our community, but this is an excellent one for downtown, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Commissioner Granlund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of thoughts. I believe that this is going to be a massive change to the adjacent park. No other side of this park area has a solid wall of this kind. It makes me a little hesitant. And then I noticed on their site plan they had not identified anything in the street frontage on that side. They've left the setback, not the setback area, but the boulevard area blank. I see then their 3D view, it is grassed, but I know that currently there are some major and mature trees there that won't survive the construction. I guess if not otherwise accounted for, I would propose an amendment to also provide street trees within that lawn strip along the roadway, if that would be agreeable to the rest of the commission.
We will see if Commissioner Christopherson seconds that. Let's see if we can
JCAP.
Okay, hi, Mr. Padneros, do you have any comment about this amendment that's before us now?
Yeah, I don't have any doubt whatsoever that we can preserve the trees located within the boulevard in between the sidewalk and the street. I think you're talking about on Emory Street. That's the street that's going to be in between our development and Wilson Square Park, which also I'm sure you guys know about the new splash pad and upgrades that are happening to that park. We kind of consider that to be a amenity for our project, so we don't want to, take away from the beauty by destroying trees. If it's in the boulevard, we're not going to touch it.
Okay. Thank you. Any discussion on the... Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, we'll call the roll on the amendment to add boulevard trees to the site plan. Commissioner Prosnick.
Okay. Aye.
Aye or no?
Aye.
Okay. Christopherson?
Aye.
Seymour?
Aye.
Brenholt?
Aye.
Granlund?
Aye.
Gregert?
Aye.
Wolfgram?
Aye.
And Obeyed.
Aye.
And that amendment passes. So now we have before us the item number 5 as amended. Any more discussion on this? Commissioner Gregert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just a question, just to make sure we're covering all the bases here. I appreciate Mr. Granlund's amendment. I guess if we could go back to the view of the property from above with the acceleration. Yeah, there we go. Just wanted to make sure that when cars are parking in the parking spaces, that where they'd be butting up against the sidewalk, is there going to be some sort of, this is the question, is there going to be some sort of parking stop blocks there so that cars do not infringe upon that sidewalk, or is that going to be elevated enough that that's not going to be an issue? Or I guess what is the plan to make sure that cars do not encroach upon the sidewalk? It looks like there's like an elevation change. I just want to make sure. Not sure if the developer would be able to answer that.
Just a minute, I'm trying to find him on the list here. Looks like Colin, number 6 is gone.
It's on the elevations.
Oh, is that Mr. Padros?
It's your local architect talking.
This is who?
Granlund.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, just the standard elevations shows ramps and other changes of elevation on those inside faces.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Gregor?
I guess when I'm looking at the parking on the southwest, there's a ramp that, like by the handicap stall. It seems like it might be at a very similar elevation, like it's a 6-inch difference. So just wanted to make sure that there's something that keeps cars from going over the sidewalk too much. Seems like there's some sort of buffer space that would allow that, but.
Let me see if Mr. Apple can answer that. Are you there, Mr. Apple?
Yes. There's some sort of, I think they looked at doing some sort of like a rough warning strip. Kind of like that would just be kind of a sensory feel if you were to go that close. But otherwise, a significant portion of that has the sidewalk ramp in front of it. Other portions are zero curb, but they do intend to either some type of bumper stop or something that's a little bit less obtrusive. That would be kind of something that you'd feel with your kind of like on the side of the highway. I think was kind of discussed.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Gregor?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's an amendment that's needed or anything. I just wanted to raise that as a concern to make sure that sidewalk is very much passable for people. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments before we vote? All right, we will call the roll on item number 5. Commissioner Prosnick.
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
Seymour.
Aye.
Brenholt. Commissioner Brenholt.
Aye. Sorry, couldn't get off mute.
That's okay. Granlund.
Aye.
Gregor.
Aye.
Wolfgram.
Aye.
Obaid.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you. Congratulations to the folks from JCAP. Item number 6 is for public discussion for recommendation to the City Council to recommend approval of annexation of vacant land west of County Road F. Mr. Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Before you tonight is an annexation of a parcel that's number 6 on the map, shown on the north side of the community. Here's a photograph showing the proposed annexation. You may remember this annexation that was back in January, just to the west. That is a subdivision proposed as Walnut Grove by the applicant. The applicant has closed on this property that's approximately 0.8 of an acres, and it is currently vacant land as shown on the photograph. This parcel was owned by adjacent property across County Road F, and like I mentioned, the applicant has purchased and is moving forward with the proposal for his subdivision. It's pretty much going to be mostly right-of-way, also stormwater facility for the connection from the subdivision to County Road F. The southern part will be the stormwater facility for the proposed development. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions this evening.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? I see none. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve this recommendation for annex? Commissioner Seymour.
I'll move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Prosnick, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the roll. Commissioner Prosnick.
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
Seymour.
Aye.
Brenholt. Commissioner Brenholt.
Aye.
I keep wanting to say Gregor when I get to Gregory. Granlund.
Aye.
Gregor.
Aye.
Wolfgram.
Aye.
Obeyed.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, and that passes. Item number 7 is public discussion for recommendation to City Council to recommend approval of a final plat on the north side of Seymour Road, east of Andover Avenue. Mr. Petrie.
Thank you again. This one's located on the east side of the community, number 7 on the map. This subdivision plat is known as Woodland Hills Estates. It was approved with a 20-foot setback. That's why it's R1P zoning. The Plan Commission and Council approved this back in December of 2019. Before you tonight is the final step of the process, the final plat, as shown on the screen. This creates 20 single-family lots, residential lots. On the map also shown is the sensitive area. That was one of the reasons why the reduction of the 20-foot setback was approved by this commission and also the city council. Proposal develops approximately almost 21 acres, and the applicant and property owner is JA Development Group LLC. Here's an aerial photograph showing the land. Now, they have removed some of the trees, and they will continue to move some of the trees as they build the street and build the single-family homes. This request will be going forward to the council. With that request will be a developer's agreement for the construction of the new street and this final plat. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission for Mr. Petrie? Commissioner Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Petrie, I'm trying to recall, are there sidewalks proposed with this project at all?
I would defer that one to Mr. Allen.
Mr. Chair, I will further defer that to Ms. Ness. If she's
Oh,
available.
okay. Let me make sure she's not muted.
Please,
Hi, go ahead.
as that will be proposed to City Council, there is a request for deferral of sidewalks through this area from the developer.
Okay.
If I wanted to, go ahead, Mr. Gregor.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I am assuming that's part of the goal to reduce the amount of space that's needed between the properties and the streets, so they don't have to cut in as much to the natural area. But I was actually just up in that area a couple of days ago to check it out. It seems, I guess I'm just not really sure if at what point that if there was any previous decisions about sidewalks, or if this is really the time that we approved them or not, or if that really is a city council question, I imagine, huh?
That is correct, Mr. Gregor. It's for when the council reviews the developer's agreement, there'll be ask in there for the deferral of sidewalks, or to have sidewalks or to not have sidewalks. At this time, the Plan Commission is just reviewing the final plat to make sure it's in compliance with the R1P standards in front of you, and this final plat is consistent with the preliminary plat.
I guess my follow-up question would be: is if this is approved, there would be room for sidewalks, correct? It's just that they're requesting in the future that there not be.
That is a good question. I would have to defer that one to Ms. Ness as well. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't seen the construction drawings for the proposed subdivision.
Ms. Ness?
We would have to go back and look at the plans. I believe there would be some plan revisions due to retaining walls that are needed to bring the road up and to the east to go south. So that's one of the deferral requests, is due to the retaining walls being there. That really limits the amount of room for the sidewalk. And then also at the cul-de-sac end of the street, having sidewalks is hard with the snow removal, as we know with our other cul-de-sacs within the community. But it is something that could be looked at City Council and prior to City Council.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions for the staff? Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, if I may, the applicant's representative is the caller that you referred to earlier. If you'd like to have if there are any questions for the applicant or.
Okay. All right. Very good. Hello. I have you as call-in user number 4, but I understand you are the applicant.
Good evening, folks. Mark Erickson from Everyday Surveying and Engineering, and yes, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Andrew Holland, that this development that is proposed in front of you tonight. That is correct.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Didn't mean to cut him off. Commissioner Greggert.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a question for Mr. Erickson. If he's still on. I guess my...
Still there, Mr. Erickson?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Greggert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Yeah, thank you. I guess some perspective on, why there is a request to defer sidewalks. Do you, obviously that's something that comes up a bit later, but do you feel that there's, I guess I'd be interested in some of the reasons now if that information is available.
Correct, and thank you. Very good question. Yes, so the nearest sidewalk is on Brookline Avenue. So it is a substantial distance away. I guess if you were to walk the path, I will do it real quick here, but from where this project commences to where the nearest sidewalk is, either on Brookline or all the way down on Seymour Road, is a pretty, not unattainable path, but it's a relatively substantial path, a little over 970 feet to go to Brookline, just from the commencement of our roadway off of Andover, where it turns into Craven Court, sir, and then it's give or take a little bit more to Seymour Road, to the ultimately south on Andover. That's the nearest adjacent sidewalk. Like Ms. Ness said, there's some opportunity to put sidewalk in. Some things would have to be investigated. The ultimate pinch of the site is on the south side of Craven Court, right after it makes the first east corner to go the corner going easterly. The southern area is very, very tight, where if a sidewalk or sidewalks were to be ever installed, there would most likely have to be a crosswalk to cross that road to go to the north side of the road, for the sake of with retaining walls being built up from the right-of-way line of what these folks own to the new road deck, it starts to get relatively horizontally constrained in that area, sir. As far as the rest of the road, there's always going to be a potential for sidewalks because the right-of-way is still 60 feet in width, and from the back of curb to the property line, there's adequate space to put a normal city standard 5-foot sidewalk. But then it begs the question: is what is it connected to? Does it give a little more versatility of what can be done? Is my truck parked over the sidewalk a little bit when they pull into these houses that do have a slightly reduced front yard setback? So, does that help answer the question, sir?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, Mr. Erickson.
No problem.
All right. Is there a motion on the commission to approve this?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Prosnick.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Seymour. Any discussion? Commissioner Gregert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just as this is something I'd like to explore, I guess, in the future, but just as a heads up, I think there is good reason to put a sidewalk here, particularly if there is a constrained entrance that has, elevation change. It has curves in the roadway as what appears to be designed here, so that people at least have a safe way to enter and exit the development. I think that makes it even more important. So, and obviously the city, has it as a priority when streets are reconstructed to consider adding sidewalks. So Andover Avenue could in the future have them to connect to Seymour Road or to Brookline and this or that. So, so I hope it's something that the applicant is thinking about how to make work. In the meantime, we'll be supporting this at Plan Commission here in hopes of finding some options for the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, we will call the roll on item number 7. Commissioner Prosnick.
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
Seymour.
Aye.
Brenholt.
Aye.
Granlund.
Aye.
Gregert.
Aye.
Wolfgram.
Aye.
And Obaid.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. That item passes. Item number 8 is public discussion for recommendation to City Council to recommend approval of a final plat located north of the existing Comet Court and north of Frisbee Lane. Mr. Petrie.
Thank you. The last item is number 8, located near the airport on the north side of town. This is another final plat before you. This is consistent with the preliminary plat that was approved. The final plat is for 8 single-family lots off of Comet Court. Here's a zoomed-in aerial showing the square footages. They all do meet R1 district standards. This Comet Court shows the aerial photograph. This project's a little different rather than the developer putting it in, which has 3 different property owners. The city of Eau Claire has agreed, and the property owners have petitioned the city to put in the utilities along with the street. That was approved back in January by the city council. So all the street and public utilities will be designed by the city, constructed by the city contractor at a later date in 2020 this year. The sidewalk was deferred by the city council, talking about sidewalks again. The reason being is because there is no sidewalk to the south, and that may raise some other questions going forward. But the applicant is proposing the final plat at 8 lots, and it's approximately almost 2 acres of development. With that, this would be reviewed by the city council at their next meeting. And with that, I'd be standing for any questions this evening.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Petrie or other staff? Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Eric Knopf, would he be the applicant? Mr. Knopf, did you have anything to add?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't have anything to add at this time.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant? All right. Thank you, Mr. Knopf.
Thank you.
Is there a motion? Mr. Seymour.
Thank you. So moved.
Mr. Christofferson.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? I see none. We will call the roll. Mr. Prosnick?
Aye.
Christofferson?
Aye.
Seymour?
Aye.
Brenholt?
Aye.
Granlund?
Aye.
Gregert?
Aye.
Wolfgram?
Aye.
Obeyed?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That item passes. We've changed a little bit of the format on our agenda item here. I will ask if there's any comments from the commission about any future items. Seeing none.
I will add, Mr. Chair, that we do have a meeting scheduled for 2 weeks from tonight on Monday, June 15th. So we do have a number of items already scheduled for that meeting.
Okay.
Also, please, if you do know already at this point, if you are unable to attend Monday, July 6th, that is the weekend of July 4th holiday, please let us know as soon as you know.
All right.
We have been, staff has been directing potential applicants, kind of away from that meeting in anticipation of that perhaps being a quorum issue or conflict with a number of the commission members. But if you do know either way, certainly let us know. Thank you.
All right. All right. Without objection, this meeting is adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689 or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.